The cemetery was almost empty now. Just me, Elena Martinez, standing beside my husband David's freshly covered grave, watching the last of the mourners disappear into their cars. The October wind cut through my black dress like it was made of paper, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. Not yet. 43 years of marriage, and somehow I felt like I was saying goodbye to a stranger. Mrs. Martinez. I turned to see a man in his 50s approaching, well-dressed in a charcoal suit that looked expensive even to my untrained eye. His face was kind but serious, with worry lines etched deep around his brown eyes. I didn't recognize him, though something about his cautious manner suggested he knew exactly who I was. "I'm sorry to disturb you during this difficult time," he said, his voice gentle but urgent. "My name is Miguel Santos. I was David's business partner." David had mentioned Miguel over the years, but they had never met socially. David always kept his business life separate from our home life, claiming he needed to protect me from the stress of his work. Now looking at Miguel's troubled expression, I wondered what kind of stress he had been shielding me from. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Mrs. Martinez. David was—" Miguel paused, searching for words. He was a complicated man. Before I could ask what he meant, Miguel reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. My breath caught in my throat. There, written across the front in David's unmistakable handwriting, was my name, Elena Martinez. The same careful script that had written "My dearest Elena" on love letters when we were young. The same handwriting that signed birthday cards and grocery lists for over 4 decades. "David asked me to give this to you if anything ever happened to him," Miguel said, pressing the envelope into my cold hands. "He said it was important that you receive it, but only after the funeral. Only when you were alone." My hands trembled as I stared at my name, written in my dead husband's hand. When had he prepared this? How long had Miguel been carrying it, waiting for this terrible moment? "What is this?" I whispered, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. Miguel's expression grew even more troubled. "I think David needs to tell you that himself, Mrs. Martinez, through what he left for you." He glanced around the empty cemetery, then back at me with something that looked like pity. "I'm truly sorry, Elena, for everything." Before I could ask what he meant by everything, Miguel turned and walked quickly toward the parking area, leaving me alone with the envelope that felt suddenly heavy in my hands. I sat down on the small bench beside David's grave, my fingers tracing his name on the envelope. Part of me wanted to tear it open immediately, but another part of me was terrified. David had been acting strangely in his final months, more distant than usual, more secretive. Our daughter Sophia had brushed off my concerns, telling me I was imagining things, that grief was making me paranoid even before he died. With shaking fingers, I finally opened the envelope. Inside, I found 2 items that would change everything I thought I knew about my life. A small brass key, old and worn smooth, and a folded piece of paper with an address written in David's careful script. An address I had never seen before. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Looking back now, I realize how perfectly orchestrated my life had been. Every morning for 43 years, I woke up in our 4-bedroom colonial in Maple Heights, a house David had designed himself when Sophia was just a baby. The morning routine never varied. Coffee brewing by 6:30, David's breakfast waiting. When he came downstairs in his perfectly pressed suits, his architectural drawings spread across our dining room table like blueprints for our future. "Elena, you're the heart of everything I build," David used to say, kissing my forehead before heading to his firm. "Without you managing our home, I could never create the buildings that define this city's skyline." I had believed him completely. When Sophia was born, I didn't hesitate to leave my teaching position at Roosevelt Elementary. David convinced me that our daughter needed her mother's full attention, and that his growing architectural firm needed a wife who could entertain clients and manage the social aspects of his business success. "We're a team, Elena," he had said, his arms around me as we stood in our newly finished kitchen. "Your job is making our home the foundation of everything we build. Sophia will have the stability of a mother who's always present, and I'll have the support system that lets me focus on providing for our family." It felt romantic then, like we were partners in building something beautiful together. I threw myself into creating the perfect home. I learned to cook elaborate meals for David's client dinners, memorized wine pairings, and could discuss architectural styles with his colleagues' wives. Our house became known in David's professional circle as the place where deals were made, over my homemade lasagna and where Sophia's piano recital provided elegant background music. Every evening, David would come home with stories from his office, and I would listen intently, asking questions about his projects and celebrating his successes. Sophia would join us at the dinner table, sharing her achievements from school, and later from law school. Those dinners felt like the foundation of a strong family. 3 people united in building successful lives. "Mom makes everything possible," Sophia would tell her friends when they visited. "Dad designs buildings, but Mom designs our whole life." I coordinated Sophia's schedules, drove her to violin lessons and debate tournaments, helped her study for the LSATs, and celebrated every milestone of her journey to becoming a successful attorney. When she graduated from law school, I cried harder than anyone in the auditorium, so proud of the confident, accomplished woman she had become. David and I would spend our quiet evenings planning our retirement dreams. He would spread travel, brochures across our coffee table, pointing to European cities where we could visit the architectural marvels he had always admired. "When Sophia's fully established and I can step back from the firm," he would say, "we'll finally have time for just us, Elena. All those places I've promised to take you." I never questioned why David's business trips became more frequent over the years, or why he started working later into the evenings. When I expressed loneliness, he would remind me how hard he was working to secure our future. "Everything I do is for you and Sophia," he would say. "This is temporary sacrifice for permanent security." I trusted him completely. I trusted that his long hours meant dedication to our family's well-being. I trusted that his growing distance was just the natural evolution of a mature marriage. I trusted that the life we had built together was solid, meaningful, and real. I had no idea I was living in a house of cards, perfectly designed by an architect who knew exactly how to make everything look stable, while the foundation was slowly crumbling beneath my feet. The conversation that changed everything happened at Romano's, the upscale Italian restaurant where we always celebrated family milestones. Sophia had just passed the bar exam, and David had insisted on ordering their most expensive champagne to toast our daughter's achievement. The candlelight reflected off Sophia's new law school ring as she beamed with pride, and I felt that familiar warmth of a mother watching her child succeed. "I'm so proud of both of you," I said, raising my glass. "Sophia, you've worked so hard for this moment, and David, you've provided everything she needed to get here." Sophia smiled broadly. "Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done it without Dad's connections in the legal community, and of course, your support, keeping everything running smoothly at home." It was then that I made what seemed like an innocent comment. The words came out naturally, born from a genuine excitement I had been carrying for weeks. "You know, watching Sophia build her career has made me think about my own future," I said, setting down my champagne glass. "I've been looking into part-time teaching positions. Roosevelt Elementary has an opening for substitute teachers, and I think it might be time for me to get back into the classroom. I miss working with children, and now that Sophia's established, maybe I could contribute more directly to our community." The silence that followed felt like someone had turned off the restaurant's background music. David's smile faltered for just a moment before transforming into something that looked almost amused. Sophia glanced at her father, and I caught something pass between them. A look that made me feel like an outsider at my own family celebration. David let out a laugh. The kind that wasn't quite mean, but wasn't exactly kind either. Elena, sweetheart, you've been out of the workforce for 22 years. Education has changed completely since you left. There are new technologies, new teaching methods, new regulations. Who would hire someone who hasn't stepped foot in a classroom since Sophia was in diapers? The words hit me like cold water. But before I could respond, Sophia jumped in with her own version of the same sentiment. "Mom, you're being a little unrealistic, don't you think?" Sophia said, her tone gentle but patronizing. "You've been amazing at being Dad's support system and managing our home, but the professional world has moved on without you. Maybe you could volunteer at the library or something, but actual teaching, that might be setting yourself up for disappointment." I felt my cheeks flush hot. Here I was, a woman who had successfully raised a daughter, managed a household, entertained clients, and supported a successful man's career for over 2 decades, being told I was unqualified to teach children how to read. "I just thought," I began, but David cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Elena, let's not spoil Sophia's celebration with unrealistic career fantasies," he said, signaling the waiter for another bottle of champagne. "You have a perfectly fulfilling life managing our home. Why complicate things by chasing dreams that aren't practical at your age?" I forced a smile and changed the subject, asking Sophia about her plans for her new position at Morrison & Associates. But the sting of their casual dismissal lingered throughout the evening. Their laughter felt different after that, like I was somehow the punchline of a joke I didn't understand. That night, I found myself in my old hope chest, pulling out my teaching certificate and the letters of recommendation I had received from Roosevelt Elementary's principal 22 years ago. "Mrs. Martinez demonstrates exceptional patience, creativity, and dedication to her students' success," one letter read. "She has a natural gift for making learning accessible and enjoyable." When had I become someone who wasn't qualified for the work I had once excelled at? When had their opinion of my capabilities become so low that my dreams were dismissed as unrealistic fantasies? The question haunted me long after the champagne had worn off. The dismissal at Romanos wasn't an isolated incident. I realized it was just the first time I had really noticed the pattern that had been building for years. Over the following months, I began seeing our family dynamics through different eyes, and what I discovered made my stomach turn. It started with the little things. During our Sunday dinners, I would offer my thoughts on current events or share something interesting I had read, only to watch David and Sophia exchange that same look I had seen at the restaurant. It was a quick glance, barely a second, but it spoke volumes. Their eyes would meet with a kind of amused patience, like parents indulging a child who didn't understand adult conversations. "That's an interesting perspective, Mom," Sophia would say in the same tone she probably used with difficult clients. "But the legal implications are actually much more complex than that." David would nod sagely. "Elena, sweetheart, these policy matters have layers that aren't immediately obvious to someone who hasn't worked in the professional world recently." I began testing this dynamic, paying closer attention to how they responded to me versus how they responded to each other. When David discussed a challenging client, Sophia would ask thoughtful questions and offer strategic advice. When Sophia talked about a difficult case, David would provide insights from his business experience. But when I tried to contribute to these conversations, they would politely redirect the discussion or simply ignore my input entirely. One evening in November, I suggested we plan our traditional family vacation to the mountains. David was reading architectural journals while Sophia reviewed case files at our kitchen table. "I was thinking we could try that new resort in Asheville," I said, spreading brochures across the table. "They have those cooking classes I mentioned." And Sophia, "There's a spa where you could really relax." Neither of them looked up from their work. "Mom, I can't really think about vacations right now," Sophia said, not lifting her eyes from her legal documents. "I'm handling 3 major cases, and I'm in the middle of the Morrison project," David added absently. "Elena, let the adults handle the planning when we actually have time for it." The words stung, but it was the casual way he said them that hurt most. I wasn't even worth the effort of a harsh tone. I was simply irrelevant to the important decisions in our family. I began noticing how they would discuss their schedules, their professional challenges, and their future plans, as if I weren't in the room. They would talk about "we" when referring to family decisions, but that "we" only included the two of them. "We should consider investing in that downtown property," David would tell Sophia over dinner. "We need to think about tax implications for next year," Sophia would respond. When I asked questions about these financial decisions that affected our entire family, David would pat my hand and say, "Don't worry your head about these complicated matters, Elena. Sophia and I have everything under control." The erosion was so gradual, so subtle, that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. But the evidence kept accumulating. My opinions were dismissed. My suggestions were ignored. My presence was tolerated, but not valued. I found myself speaking less and less during family gatherings. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I had learned that what I said didn't matter. I would sit at our dinner table watching my husband and daughter engage in animated conversations about their important lives while I became a ghost in my own home. The most devastating part wasn't their cruelty. It was how natural it had become for all of us, including me. I had somehow accepted my own invisibility without even realizing when it had started. The moment that shattered whatever dignity I had left happened at David's firm's annual Christmas party in December. The event was always held at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. For 20 years, I had looked forward to these elegant evenings where I could dress up, meet new people, and feel like part of David's professional world. That night, I wore the emerald green dress David had bought me for our anniversary, the one he said brought out my eyes. I had spent the afternoon at the salon getting my hair styled the way Sophia had suggested, hoping to look worthy of standing beside my successful husband and accomplished daughter. The party was in full swing when I excused myself to use the restroom. The ladies' lounge was just down the hallway from the main ballroom, but as I walked past a small alcove where some of David's colleagues were gathered with drinks, I heard my husband's voice clearly. "The secret to my success," David was saying, with the confident tone he used when holding court, "is understanding that behind every great architect is a woman who handles all the domestic details so he can focus on the important work." I stopped walking, hidden just around the corner, my heart beating faster as I realized he was talking about me. "Elena's been a wonderful hausfrau all these years," David continued. I could hear the smiles in the other men's voices as they chuckled appreciatively. "She makes a perfect home, throws dinner parties, keeps everything running smoothly. But she wouldn't understand the complexities of modern business if her life depended on it. She's lived in her little domestic bubble for so long, she thinks. Substitute teaching is a realistic career goal at 67. The laughter that followed felt like glass breaking inside my chest. These were men I had cooked for, whose wives I had befriended, whose children I had watched grow up over decades of company gatherings. "My Sophia keeps trying to get Elena more involved in the real world," David went on. "But honestly, some people are just built for supporting roles. Elena's never had an original thought about anything more complex than meal planning. It's charming in its own way." I stood there in my emerald dress, perfectly styled hair, and carefully applied makeup, feeling like I was dissolving from the inside out. The word Hausfrau kept echoing in my head, not even housewife or homemaker. Hausfrau, like I was some kind of relic from another century. Miguel Santos was in that group, and when I finally found the courage to step into view, I saw the discomfort on his face. He looked away quickly, but not before I caught the pity in his eyes. The other men fell silent when they saw me, their expressions shifting from amusement to awkward guilt. "Elena," David said smoothly, as if nothing had happened. "Perfect timing. The gentlemen were just saying how lovely you looked tonight." The transition was so seamless, his smile so warm and natural, that I almost wondered if I had imagined the entire conversation. But Miguel's uncomfortable expression and the way the other men suddenly found their drinks fascinating told me I had heard every devastating word. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. I was just going to powder my nose. David stepped forward and put his arm around my waist in what looked like an affectionate gesture but felt like a performance. "Elena, why don't you help Mrs. Patterson with the coat check? The ladies could really use someone with your organizational skills." And just like that, I was dismissed from my own husband's professional celebration, relegated to coat check duty, like hired help, while David returned to charming clients and Sophia worked with potential employers. I spent the rest of the evening hanging coats and retrieving wraps, invisible to everyone except when they needed something from me. The woman who had once been told she had exceptional patience, creativity, and dedication was now nothing more than a housefrau with good organizational skills. The Christmas party humiliation was still fresh in my mind 3 weeks later when David had his first heart attack. It was mild, the doctors assured us, more of a warning than a serious cardiac event. But watching him in that hospital bed, pale and vulnerable with monitors beeping around him, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not about his condition, but about the possibility that this scare might bring us closer together. During his recovery, I did what I had always done best. I arranged his medications, prepared heart-healthy meals, canceled his appointments, and created a peaceful environment for his healing. For 2 weeks, he seemed grateful for my care, even affectionate in a way he hadn't been in years. "Elena," he said one afternoon as I brought him homemade soup, "I don't know what I would do without you. You take such good care of everything." I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe this crisis would help him remember why he had fallen in love with me all those years ago. Maybe we could rebuild what we had lost. Once. David was cleared to return to work. I suggested we use his recovery period as an opportunity to reconnect as a couple. "David, we've been given a second chance," I said one evening, sitting beside him on our couch. "Maybe we could slow down a little, spend more time together. We could take those trips we've been planning or just rediscover what we enjoyed about each other when we were young." His expression shifted from mild interest to irritation faster than I could process. "Elena, I don't have time for your neediness right now," he said, his voice sharp with impatience. "Do you have any idea how behind I am on the Morrison project? Sophia and I are handling important business decisions while I'm stuck here recovering. The last thing I need is you clinging to me like some desperate housewife." The words hit me like a physical blow, especially after weeks of nursing him back to health. But he wasn't finished. "I know you think this heart attack means we should act like newlyweds again, but that's not realistic. Sophia and I have real responsibilities. We're dealing with complex financial matters and client relationships that you wouldn't begin to understand. Your job is to keep the house running smoothly, not to create additional pressure by demanding attention. I don't have time to give." I stared at him. This man I had just spent 2 weeks caring for around the clock made me realize that my love and devotion meant nothing to him. I was useful when he needed nursing, but inconvenient when he wanted to return to his important life without me. "I wasn't being needy," I said quietly. "I was trying to save our marriage." David looked at me with genuine surprise, as if the idea that our marriage needed saving had never occurred to him. "Elena, our marriage is fine. You're just overthinking everything because you don't have enough to occupy your mind. Maybe you should find some volunteer work or a hobby club, something age-appropriate." That night, I called my sister Rosa and asked if I could stay with her for the weekend. I didn't tell David I was leaving. I just packed a small bag and drove to Rosa's house in the next town over. Rosa took one look at my face and wrapped me in her arms without asking questions. Later, sitting in her kitchen with tea and tissues, I finally spoke the words I had been avoiding for months. "I feel like I've disappeared, Rosa. I don't even know who I am anymore without them telling me." The sobs came then, deep and painful. I spent 43 years building a life with someone who doesn't even see me as a person. I'm just furniture to him, useful furniture that talks. Rosa held me while I cried for the woman I used to be, the one who had dreams and opinions and value beyond her organizational skills. When I returned home from Rosa's that Sunday evening, the house felt different. Not physically changed, but emotionally foreign, like I was walking into someone else's life. David was in his study, door closed, talking loudly on a conference call with clients in California. Sophia was at the kitchen table, her laptop open, legal documents spread across the surface where I usually served our family dinners. Neither of them looked up when I walked in. "How was Rosa?" David called out absently from behind his closed door, not pausing his conversation long enough to hear my answer. Sophia glanced up briefly. "Mom, I ordered Chinese takeout. The containers are in the fridge if you want some." That was it. No questions about where I had been or why I had left. No concern about my state of mind or interest in my weekend away. I had been gone for 2 days, and my absence had been so unremarkable that they had simply ordered takeout and continued with their important lives. Over the following weeks, a devastating routine emerged. David would leave for work before I woke up, coming home after 9 most nights. Sophia would stop by twice a week, but only to discuss business matters with her father or to pick up mail she still had delivered to our house. They would sit in David's study with the door closed, their voices a low murmur of serious conversation about clients, investments, and strategies I wasn't invited to understand. I began eating dinner alone every night. At first, I set the table for 3 out of habit, then 2 when I realized David wouldn't be home. Eventually, I stopped setting the table at all. I would stand at the kitchen counter eating microwave leftovers while staring out the window at our perfectly maintained backyard, wondering when I had become a stranger in my own life. The silence in the house became oppressive. Without David's client dinners or Sophia's visits, there was no reason to cook elaborate meals or maintain conversation. The grandfather clock David had insisted we buy for the living room ticked loudly in the emptiness, marking time in a life that seemed to have stopped moving forward. Some evenings I would sit in our living room, surrounded by family photos that now felt like evidence of a life that had never really belonged to me. There was Sophia's graduation photo, David and me at various company parties, family vacations where I had organized every detail. In every picture, I was smiling. But looking at them now, I could see something hollow in my eyes. As if I had been playing a role for so long, I had forgotten there was a real person underneath. The worst moments came late at night, when I couldn't sleep. I would lie in bed beside David, listening to him breathe, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. This man who had shared my bed for 43 years was a complete stranger to me. I knew his breathing patterns, his morning routines, his coffee preferences, but I realized I had no idea what he thought about when he looked at me, or if he thought about me at all. I stopped looking in mirrors because the woman staring back was someone I didn't recognize. My eyes had developed a vacant quality, like I was slowly fading away from the inside out. I had become a ghost, haunting my own life, existing without living, present without being seen. One particularly dark evening, I found myself standing in the bathroom at 3 in the morning, staring at the hollow-eyed woman in the mirror and wondering if this was all that was left of Elena Martinez, the teacher, the dreamer, the woman who had once believed she mattered. Where had she gone? I had hit bottom without even realizing I was falling. 3 months had passed since David's funeral, and I still couldn't bring myself to throw away the mysterious envelope Miguel Santos had given me. It sat on my kitchen counter like an accusation, the brass key cold and heavy in my palm whenever I worked up the courage to hold it. The address, 1247 Burwood Lane, meant nothing to me, but something about David's careful handwriting on that paper made my stomach clench with dread. Rosa had been urging me to investigate for weeks. "Elena, "You'll never find peace until you know what David was hiding," she said during one of our Tuesday coffee visits. "Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's something important, but living in limbo isn't helping you heal." On a gray Thursday morning in March, I finally found the courage to drive to Birchwood Lane. It was across town in a neighborhood I rarely visited, filled with modest apartment complexes and small houses that looked nothing like our upscale suburban area. Number 1247 was a 2-story brick building with 6 units, well-maintained but unremarkable. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, key trembling in my hand before I walked to the front door. There were 6 mailboxes in the entry hall. The third one from the left bore a small label that made my world tilt: D. Martinez, Unit 3B. My legs felt unsteady as I climbed the stairs to the second floor. The brass key fit perfectly into the lock of Unit 3B, turning with a click that sounded like my life breaking apart. The apartment was fully furnished and clearly lived in. Men's clothing hung in the closet. David's clothing. His favorite coffee mug sat in the sink. His reading glasses were folded on the nightstand, next to a book I had never seen him read. But it was the photographs on the dresser that made me sink onto the edge of the bed, gasping for air. David smiled back at me from a dozen framed photos. But he wasn't alone. A woman with kind eyes and graying hair stood beside him in each picture. They were at restaurants I didn't recognize, on vacation in places we had never traveled together, celebrating what looked like anniversaries and birthdays I knew nothing about. Her name was Carmen, according to the cards and letters I found in David's desk drawer. "My dearest David," one letter began, "thank you for the beautiful weekend in Savannah. I know our situation isn't ideal, but I treasure every moment we have together. Our situation, their situation." I was reading about my husband's other life, a parallel existence I had never suspected, but the most devastating discovery was yet to come. In David's desk, I found bank statements showing systematic transfers from our joint account, the account I had trusted him to manage while I focused on being the perfect housewife. Over the past 5 years, he'd moved over $200,000 to a separate account I knew nothing about. Money he had been using to maintain this apartment and support this other life. The final blow was a letter in David's handwriting, addressed to me, but never sent. The envelope was sealed, dated just 2 weeks before his death. With shaking hands, I tore it open. "My dearest Elena," it began. "If you're reading this, it means Miguel kept his promise to give you the key after I'm gone. I know this discovery will hurt you terribly, and I'm a coward for not having the courage to tell you while I was alive." The letter went on for 3 pages, confessing everything: his relationship with Carmen, his financial deception, and most shocking of all, his complete awareness of how cruel he had treated me. "You deserved so much better than the husband I became," the letter continued. "You gave me everything: your youth, your career, your unwavering devotion, and I gave you nothing but contempt disguised as protection." I told myself I was shielding you from complexity, but the truth is, I was just too selfish to let you have your own life. I sat in that strange apartment, surrounded by evidence of my husband's secret world, finally understanding that I hadn't been losing my mind. I had been living with a lie so complete, so carefully constructed, that even David himself had forgotten which version of his life was real. I must have sat in that apartment for 3 hours, reading David's confession letter over and over again. Each word rewrote the story of my entire adult life. The man who had dismissed my intelligence, who had called me a hausfrau to his colleagues, who had made me feel invisible and worthless, had known exactly what he was doing the entire time. I convinced myself that keeping you dependent was protecting you. One paragraph read, "But I was really protecting myself from having to share power in our marriage. Your dreams of returning to teaching terrified me because they meant you might discover you didn't need me as much as I needed you to believe you did." The validation was overwhelming. For months, I had questioned my own sanity, wondering if I was imagining the dismissive looks, the condescending comments, the systematic exclusion from important decisions. Now I had proof in David's own handwriting that every slight I had felt was real. Every moment of dismissal was calculated. Every instance of being made to feel small was intentional. But along with the validation came something unexpected: anger. Not the explosive rage I might have expected, but a cold, clarifying fury that seemed to burn away the fog of self-doubt I had been living in for years. I wasn't a failure as a wife. I wasn't too old to have value. I wasn't the problem in our marriage. David was. I walked through that apartment with new eyes, examining the life he had built without me. The books on his shelves were ones I would have enjoyed discussing. The coffee table held travel magazines featuring destinations I had begged him to visit with me. The kitchen was stocked with ingredients for meals he claimed he never had time to enjoy when he was home. He hadn't been too busy for a personal life. He had simply built his personal life without me. Standing in David's secret kitchen, I remembered the woman I used to be before 43 years of systematic diminishment. I remembered Elena Martinez at 24, the teacher who could captivate a classroom full of restless children, who had innovative ideas about curriculum design, who was respected by her colleagues and beloved by her students. That woman hadn't disappeared. She had been buried under decades of being told she wasn't smart enough, wasn't relevant enough, wasn't enough. But she was still there. I could feel her stirring like someone waking up after a very long sleep. I looked at my reflection in David's bathroom mirror and saw something I hadn't seen in years: fire in my eyes. The hollow, defeated woman who had been haunting my own home was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood that she had been living in an elaborate lie designed to keep her small and manageable. The letter fell from my hands as I made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. I was going to reclaim the life David had stolen from me, not the life we had built together. That had been an illusion anyway. The life I had given up when I believed his promises about partnership and teamwork. I picked up my phone and called the community college where I had seen an advertisement for adult education instructor positions. My voice when I spoke to the department coordinator was steadier than it had been in years. "This is Elena Martinez," I said. "I'm a retired teacher interested in returning to the classroom. I'd like to schedule an interview to discuss opportunities in your adult literacy program." The woman on the phone was enthusiastic and welcoming. She didn't question my qualifications or suggest I was too old to be useful. She simply scheduled an interview for the following week and asked me to bring my teaching credentials. When I hung up the phone, I was smiling for the first time since David's funeral. The fire that had been slowly dying for decades was finally burning bright again. Over the next 3 weeks, I began rebuilding my life with the methodical precision David had once used to design his buildings. The difference was that this time I was constructing something for myself, not serving as the foundation for someone else's dreams. I kept my discoveries about David's double life completely to myself. When Sophia stopped by for her usual visits to collect mail and discuss important matters, she assumed I couldn't understand. I simply smiled and offered her coffee. When she made her customary condescending comments about my adjustment to widowhood, I nodded politely and changed the subject. She had no idea that her helpless, dependent mother had spent the previous afternoon interviewing for a teaching position with more confidence than she had felt in decades. The interview at Riverside Community College had gone better than I dared hope. Dr. Patricia Williams, the adult education director, had been impressed by my credentials and experience. "Mrs. Martinez, we desperately need someone with your background," she had said, reviewing my old teaching portfolio. "Our adult literacy program serves women who are returning to education after raising families, people who are learning English as a second language, and individuals who never had the opportunity to complete their education. Your experience with diverse learning styles would be invaluable." I accepted the part-time position immediately, asking only that my start date be delayed by 2 weeks. I had preparations to make, and I wanted to be fully ready before I revealed my new life to my family. During those 2 weeks, I quietly enrolled in online courses to update my teaching methods and familiarize myself with modern educational technology. The woman who had been told she couldn't possibly understand contemporary teaching practices spent her evenings mastering interactive whiteboard software and digital assessment tools. Every new skill I acquired felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that David had convinced me was lost forever. I also began meeting with Margaret Chen, a financial advisor Rosa had recommended. The discovery of David's secret account and the systematic transfer of our money had awakened me to how completely I had abdicated control over my own financial future. "Elena," Margaret said during our second meeting, "you're in a much stronger position than you realized. Between your late husband's life insurance, your share of the house, and the investment accounts, you have significant assets. You're not the financially helpless widow you believed yourself to be." For the first time in years, I opened my own checking account, one that Sophia and David's estate attorney knew nothing about. It felt revolutionary, having money that was entirely my own to spend on my own priorities. I joined a yoga class at the community center, something I had wanted to do for years but had been discouraged from by David's comments about age-appropriate activities. The instructor, a vibrant woman named Linda, who was actually 5 years older than me, welcomed me warmly and introduced me to other women who had found fitness and friendship later in life. "Elena, you have such natural balance," Linda told me after my 3rd class. "Have you considered that some people just bloom later in life?" The words stayed with me. Maybe I wasn't too old to start over. Maybe 67 was the perfect age to finally become the woman I was meant to be. Most importantly, I began observing Sophia with the same clear-eyed assessment I had applied to David's secret life. I watched how she automatically expected me to defer to her judgment, how she spoke to me in the same patronizing tone her father had used, and how she made assumptions about my capabilities without ever asking about my actual thoughts or feelings. She was about to discover that the helpless mother she thought she knew had never actually existed. The first sign that something had changed came when Sophia arrived for her weekly visit, expecting to find me in the same grief-stricken, confused state I had been in for months. Instead, she found me at the kitchen table, grading adult literacy assessments, my laptop open to a digital curriculum planning program, wearing the confident smile of someone who had rediscovered her purpose. "Mom, what's all this?" Sophia asked, her voice carrying that familiar tone of amused concern, like a parent discovering their child playing with grown-up paperwork. "I'm preparing lessons for my new teaching position," I said simply, not looking up from the assessment I was reviewing. "I start at Riverside Community College next week." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the living room. When I finally looked up, Sophia's expression was a mixture of confusion and barely concealed alarm. "Teaching position?" she repeated slowly. "Mom, we talked about this. You've been out of education for over 20 years. Don't you think you're setting yourself up for disappointment?" I set down my pen and looked directly at her, my voice calm and matter-of-fact. "Sophia, I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm informing you of my decision. There's a difference." Something in my tone made her straighten in her chair. This wasn't the uncertain, seeking approval mother she was used to managing. This was someone who had already made up her mind and wasn't interested in being talked out of it. "But Mom, the stress, the technology, the young people you'll be dealing with," Sophia pressed, her voice rising slightly. "Are you sure you're emotionally ready for something this demanding? You've barely processed Dad's death." I closed my laptop and gave her my full attention. "Sophia, I appreciate your concern, but I've already completed my technology training. I've updated my credentials. I've been interviewed and hired by people who evaluated my qualifications professionally. Your father and you spent years convincing me I wasn't capable of understanding complex matters. But it turns out I'm quite capable when given the opportunity." Sophia blinked, clearly struggling to process this shift. She had come expecting to guide her confused, dependent mother through another week of widow's grief, but instead found someone who sounded more confident than she had in years. "I just think you should slow down," Sophia said, her voice taking on the coaxing tone she used with difficult clients. "Maybe volunteer at the library first, something less demanding. You don't want to bite off more than you can chew." I smiled at her with genuine warmth, but my words were steel. "Sophia, I've been chewing quite a bit more than you've ever given me credit for. I managed a household, raised a successful daughter, and supported your father's career for 4 decades. I think I can handle teaching adults how to read." The shift in power was palpable. Sophia, accustomed to being the competent daughter managing her helpless mother, found herself facing a woman who no longer needed managing. Her usual patronizing advice fell flat against my newfound certainty. "Where is all this coming from?" Sophia asked. And for the first time, I heard something new in her voice, respect mixed with a hint of unease. "It's not coming from anywhere." "Sweetheart," I said, returning to my lesson plans. "It's been here all along. I just stopped asking permission to be myself." Sophia left that afternoon without the usual litany of instructions about what I should or shouldn't do. For the first time in years, she seemed uncertain about her role in our relationship. And I found that uncertainty gave me power I hadn't known I possessed. The helpless widow was gone, and everyone was beginning to notice. The confrontation I had been unconsciously preparing for came on a Sunday evening in May, nearly 2 months after I had started teaching. Sophia arrived for dinner carrying a manila folder and wearing the expression of someone about to deliver difficult but necessary news. I had prepared her favorite meal, chicken parmesan with homemade pasta, and set the dining room table with our good china, just as I had for countless family dinners over the years. But this time, I wasn't performing the role of accommodating hostess. I was setting the stage for a conversation that was long overdue. "Mom, I need to discuss some concerns I have about your recent behavior," Sophia began, placing the folder on the table between us like evidence in a court case. "I've been talking with some colleagues who specialize in elderly psychology, and they've helped me understand that sometimes grief can manifest as impulsive decision-making." She opened the folder to reveal printed articles about grief counseling, retirement community brochures, and what looked like information about assisted living facilities. My stomach clenched, but my voice remained steady. "Go on," I said simply, cutting my chicken with deliberate precision. "This sudden career change, the secretiveness about your finances, the way you've been pulling away from family guidance," Sophia continued, her lawyer voice in full effect. "These can all be signs that you're not processing Dad's death in a healthy way. I think it would be beneficial for you to speak with a professional about transitioning to a more age-appropriate lifestyle." I set down my fork and looked at my daughter. Really looked at her, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time how thoroughly she had absorbed her father's methods of control. "Sophia," I said calmly, "I need to show you something." I left the dining room and returned with a box I had prepared weeks ago, knowing this moment would eventually come. Inside were David's confession letter, bank statements from his secret account, photographs from his apartment, and a key piece of evidence Sophia had never seen: copies of the financial documents showing the systematic transfer of money that should have been part of our family's security. "Before you continue explaining my psychological state," I said, placing the documents in front of her, "I think you should understand what kind of man your father really was and what kind of woman your mother has always been." Sophia's confident expression faltered as she picked up David's letter. I watched her face change as she read his confession, saw the exact moment she realized that everything she thought she knew about our family was built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. "This can't be real," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Dad wouldn't. He loved you. He protected you. He controlled me," I corrected gently. "And he taught you to do the same thing." Sophia, I wasn't losing my mind when I suggested returning to work. I wasn't being unrealistic when I wanted to contribute to family decisions. I was being systematically dismissed by people who benefited from keeping me small and dependent. Pulled out my teaching evaluations from Riverside Community College, letters from grateful students, and my updated financial statements showing the accounts I had opened and managed entirely on my own. Your colleagues were right about one thing, I continued, my voice growing stronger. I am processing your father's death, but not in the way you expected. I'm discovering that the helpless, incompetent woman you both created never actually existed. I'm not too old to work, too naive to understand finances, or too fragile to make my own decisions. I'm capable of far more than either of you gave me credit for. Sophia stared at the evidence spread across our dining room table, her carefully constructed intervention crumbling as she realized she was looking at proof of her own complicity in decades of emotional manipulation. Mom, I didn't know, she said finally, her voice small. I thought I was helping. I know you did, I replied, but now you do know. The question is, what are you going to do with this information? 3 days after my confrontation with Sophia, I received a phone call that would complete the transformation of my grief into something far more powerful. Miguel Santos, the man who had delivered David's envelope at the funeral, asked if he could meet with me privately. There were matters, he said, that we needed to discuss about David's business dealings. We met at a quiet cafe downtown, and Miguel's expression was as troubled as it had been at the cemetery 6 months earlier. Elena, I've been struggling with how much to tell you, he began, stirring his coffee nervously. The envelope I gave you was just the beginning. David's deception went far deeper than his personal life. Miguel opened his briefcase and pulled out financial documents that made David's secret apartment seem like a minor indiscretion. Over the past 3 years, David had been systematically embezzling money from Santos and Martinez Architecture, using his position as senior partner to redirect client payments into accounts only he controlled. I discovered it 2 weeks before David's death, Miguel explained. He was stealing from our biggest projects, the Morrison downtown development, the university expansion, the hospital renovation. We're talking about $850,000 in missing funds. My foi. Hands trembled as I examined the evidence. David hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He had been stealing from his business partner, his clients, and potentially putting Miguel's reputation and livelihood at risk. I was preparing to confront him, possibly press charges, Miguel continued. But then he died, and I found myself in an impossible position. Exposing him would destroy his legacy and hurt you and Sophia, but staying silent would make me complicit in his crimes. I looked up from the documents, my mind racing. Miguel, what do you need from me? He seemed surprised by my directness. Elena, I don't need anything from you. I need to do something for you. You see, David wasn't as clever as he thought he was. In trying to hide his thefts, he inadvertently created a paper trail that led me not just to the missing money, but to several accounts he had hidden from everyone, including Carmen. Miguel pulled out another set of documents. David had been preparing to disappear Elena. He had been moving money into offshore accounts, planning what I believe was going to be a complete abandonment of his life here. The heart attack stopped him before he could execute whatever plan he had. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. David hadn't just been living a double life. He had been preparing to escape from both his lives entirely. But here's what David didn't expect, Miguel continued, his voice gaining strength. As his business partner, I have certain legal rights and fiduciary responsibilities. I've been working with forensic accountants and federal investigators for the past month. We've recovered all the stolen funds plus substantial penalties and interest. He slid a final document across the table. Elena, David's estate owes the firm $850,000, but the recovered funds total over $1.2 million. After legal fees and restitution, there's a surplus of approximately $400,000 that rightfully belongs to you as David's widow. I stared at the settlement agreement, hardly believing what I was reading. "There's one condition," Miguel said gently. "I'd like to partner with you on something meaningful. I've seen what you're doing at the community college. Elena, what would you think about using David's stolen money to create a nonprofit organization? Something that helps women over 50 re-enter the workforce, provides job training, financial literacy, and emotional support for women who've been diminished by their circumstances." I looked at this man who had carried David's secrets and chosen to use them not for revenge, but for restoration. David's betrayal was becoming the foundation for something that could help other women avoid the decades of manipulation I had endured. "Miguel," I said, extending my hand to shake his. "I think that's exactly what David's guilt should become, other women's liberation." 6 months after our confrontation at the dinner table, Sophia appeared at my apartment on a Saturday morning, carrying a bouquet of white roses. My favorite flowers. Though I wasn't sure she had ever noticed that before, she looked different somehow, smaller and less certain than the confident attorney who had tried to stage an intervention about my age-appropriate lifestyle choices. I was grading papers from my intermediate literacy class when she knocked, and I took my time getting to the door. The old Elena would have dropped everything to accommodate Sophia's unexpected visit. The new Elena finished the sentence she was writing before setting down her pen. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, opening the door with genuine warmth but no urgency. "This is a surprise." Sophia stood in my doorway, looking around my new space with obvious confusion. I had moved out of the house David designed 3 months earlier, using part of the settlement money to purchase a bright, modern condominium that reflected my own taste rather than his architectural vision. The walls were painted in colors I loved, filled with books I wanted to read, and decorated with artwork that spoke to me rather than impressing clients. "Mom, I brought these for you," Sophia said, holding out the roses like a peace offering. "I was hoping we could talk." I accepted the flowers and invited her in, but I didn't rush to put them in water or offer her coffee immediately. Instead, I waited for her to tell me why she had come. "I've been seeing a therapist," Sophia said finally, settling uncomfortably on my new couch. "Dr. Rebecca Martinez, no relation, obviously. She specializes in family dynamics and childhood psychological patterns." I nodded encouragingly, but said nothing. I had learned the power of silence, of allowing others to fill conversational space instead of immediately rushing to make them comfortable. "I realized that I learned Dad's behavior toward you," Sophia continued, her voice shaking slightly. "All those years I thought I was protecting you, helping you, but I was really just controlling you the same way he did. I dismissed your intelligence, your capabilities, your right to make your own decisions." She pulled a tissue from her purse, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. "The worst part is that I was so convinced I was the competent one, the successful one, that I never stopped to consider what you had sacrificed to make my success possible. You gave up your career so I could have every opportunity. You managed our entire family life so Dad and I could focus on our professional goals. And instead of being grateful, we treated you like you were furniture." I finished gently. "Useful furniture that occasionally had opinions." Sophia flinched at my words but nodded. "Yes, exactly like that. And Mom, I am so deeply ashamed of how I treated you, the woman who raised me, who supported my education, who believed in my dreams when I didn't believe in them myself. I treated her like she was incapable of having dreams of her own." I could see that her remorse was genuine, but I had learned not to immediately rush to comfort others when they felt guilty about how they had treated me. "Sophia, I appreciate your apology," I said carefully. "I can see that you've been doing real work to understand what happened between us, but I need you to understand that forgiveness isn't the same thing as returning to the way things were." She looked up hopefully. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I love you and I want you in my life, but our relationship needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. You can't dismiss my opinions anymore. You can't make decisions about my life without consulting me. You can't treat me like I need your management and guidance." Sophia nodded eagerly. "Yes, absolutely. I want to learn how to have a real relationship with you, not the patronizing dynamic we had before." "Then we can start over," I said, finally going to put her roses in water. "But this time, we start as equals." 1 year after David's funeral, I stood in my classroom at Riverside Community College, watching my intermediate literacy students work through their final exam of the semester. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating faces filled with concentration and hope. Women like Maria, who was learning to read at 55 so she could help her grandchildren with homework, and James, a veteran who had hidden his illiteracy for decades behind charm and clever deflection. These were people who had been told, like me, that they were too old, too simple, or too set in their ways to learn new things. Watching them prove those assumptions wrong never failed to fill me with profound satisfaction. "Mrs. Martinez," whispered Rebecca, a 62-year-old woman who had enrolled after her husband's death, left her unable to read his insurance documents. "I finished early. Should I go back and check my answers?" "What do you think, Rebecca?" I asked, gently. "You know your own capabilities better than anyone else." She smiled with the confidence that comes from being trusted to make your own decisions. "I think I'll review the essay section once more." I nodded approvingly and moved to help. Another student, my fingers unconsciously touching the small pendant I wore around my neck. It was made from the brass key that had unlocked David's secret apartment, transformed by a local artisan into something beautiful and meaningful. The key that had once opened the door to my husband's betrayal now reminded me daily of the door. It had opened to my own liberation. At my desk, I had a small framed photo from last month's ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Elena Martinez Center for Women's Advancement. Miguel and I stood together with our first graduating class, 22 women who had completed our 6-month program combining job skills training, financial literacy, and emotional empowerment workshops. The money David had stolen and hidden was now funding second chances for women who had been told they were past their prime. "The beautiful thing about starting over," I had told that first graduating class, "is that you bring all your life experience with you. You're not starting from nothing. You're starting from everything you've learned." During my lunch break, I walked to the faculty lounge where my colleagues had gathered around a cake, celebrating Dr. Williams's announcement of my promotion to department coordinator. At 68, I was being recognized not as someone's wife or mother, but as Elena Martinez, educator and advocate. "Elena," Dr. Williams had said during the morning announcement, "your innovative curriculum design and natural leadership have transformed our adult education program. Your students don't just learn to read, they learn to believe in themselves." As I sat in the faculty room, listening to genuine professional respect and friendship, I thought about the woman I had been just 18 months ago. The woman who ate dinner alone while her husband charmed clients and her daughter worked with colleagues. The woman who had stood in front of mirrors not recognizing herself, who had accepted invisibility as the price of being loved. That woman was gone, not erased, but transformed into someone David and Sophia could never have imagined. The house they had created had never really existed anyway. She was just a role I had played so convincingly that even I had forgotten I was acting. Sophia visited every other Sunday now, and our relationship was slowly rebuilding on the foundation of mutual respect. She no longer tried to manage my life or question my decisions. Instead, she asked about my students, listened to my ideas about the nonprofit, and sometimes even asked for my advice about her own challenges. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she had said, last Sunday as we walked through the park near my apartment. "Not just for what you've accomplished, but for who you've become." I had smiled at her words, but the truth was simpler. I hadn't become someone new. I had simply remembered who I had always been underneath 43 years of being told I was someone else.